Hey everybody, I'm so excited. We have just finished recording this week's episode of the Lionheart Institute podcast, and it's been a great one. It's the first one that we've done with a guest, and it's really what I've been moving towards the whole time. It's a long episode, so you may want to take this one in chunks. You look down below, I'll have the segments timed out, and you might want to take it over a day's journey, or maybe even a couple days, but it's well worth checking out, being a part of. Please do like, comment, and share. And then as well, most importantly, please, my beloved, would you subscribe to our YouTube channel? It's what we need. So be involved in it. God bless you, and thanks for hanging out. Choo choo, choo choo. Choo choo, choo choo. All right, everybody. My name is Richard Thomas. I am the host of the Lionheart Institute podcast, and I have an exciting episode that we're bringing you today. We've been talking so much about injustice and talking about the heart of mothers and fathers toward their children that I would be amiss if I didn't bring on my first guest to the show to really talk about what it's like raising black kids in the world that we live in today. Now, we're in a unique situation because our kids are mixed. I was fortunate enough to have 3 children from my first marriage, and now with my wife, Tiffany, we're able to have 3 beautiful children. But I would be amiss if I didn't bring on the love of my life to really talk a little bit about her journey, her story, but then talk about raising kids in the world that we live in. Tiffany Thomas, welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here on the other side anyway.
Right. You've been here for a few of the episodes and watched kind of as they've developed, but it's great to have you on this side of the camera.
It's good to be here.
So while we're beginning, tell a bit to the audience about who you are. You have such a unique background, growing up kind of in multiple places around the country. You've had a Denver experience, you've had a Washington experience, you've had a Montana experience, but you've also had a North Carolina experience, and then you had a California experience? Georgia. And so kind of all over the place, and which is giving you great diversity and perspective of what this country is and different parts of the place that we live. But just share a little bit about you, and then we'll get into the meat of what we want to talk about.
Sounds good. So as Richard said, I'm Tiffany Thomas. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. For those of you who don't know me, I did kind of grow up all over around the United States. As a child, I grew up in North Carolina, which is where I was born, and from there moved to Washington, lived in Montana, Colorado, Georgia, but Washington for most of my life. I was a single mom for years. As Richard said, we have a beautiful white little baby boy. Logan is my little mini-me, and for a long time, I was a single mom with him living in the South, and I worked full-time and took care of him by myself for the most part, and at one point in time I decided to make some changes. I kind of felt a calling to want to help people. I worked with human trafficking for a little while with an amazing nonprofit organization who deals with helping girls who have been human trafficked. So I got involved with that for a little bit, and that really had a huge impact in my life. And I knew that I was called to really help people. So I decided to go back to school as a single mother and a full-time employee. I became a full-time student as well, earning my psychology degree. I did that for a while, and actually got involved with Richard halfway through that process, added a couple more children to the mix, graduated. Now I'm currently working on my master's in psychology, actually clinical mental health counseling to be exact. So it's definitely been a journey, and definitely encountered a lot of different things throughout my lifetime, for sure.
Did you ever picture yourself as a young person kind of in this situation in the world that we live in now, or was the world that you live in a very different picture of the future?
This is definitely not what I saw my life being. Truth be told, growing up, especially in white America, I believe that we're told that beauty is blonde hair and blue eyes, right? That's what Hollywood deems as attractive, what a lot of people in the world deem as attractive. And for me, the thought of marrying a black man definitely was not on my list to do. And So I fully intended to have blonde hair, blue-eyed children. I wanted them to have the best opportunities in life. And if the world said to me that blonde hair and blue eyes was kind of the it factor, I wanted my children to have that. And that is kind of what I thought growing up for a very, very long time. And so definitely this is not what I thought my life would be right now.
At what point did you really kind of feel that change? Because to grow up with that definition of what you would think your relationships would look like, what you thought your world would look like, and then all of a sudden, it was kind of a sudden, right, for you, just a shifting in your inner womanhood as far as what you were attracted to and who you were attracted to. How did that happen, and what kind of ran through your mind, and where do you feel like you're at now in that evolution?
It's kind of funny because I've always been attracted to men of different color. So I've never had this idea that I was only attracted to a very specific person. I've been attracted to many different nationalities of people. However, my mindset was I could only marry and have children
Gotcha.
with a blonde hair, blue-eyed man. So that just kind of always took precedent over ever dating somebody that was a different color. That was not something I ever did. Never thought about doing it. I didn't dislike anybody. It was just my mindset that I wanted blonde hair and blue-eyed children. So what was the point of dating somebody that looked like you?
Right. So I think that a lot of kids are really indoctrinated as far as their racial background, what they're attracted to, what's acceptable to their families, what those beliefs are. And I hope we get into it a little bit more as we go on into the interview, and we don't step on too many toes because I know it's a sensitive topic.
Sure.
But really the world that you were brought up in was very isolated. Right, I kind of call it from the white cloth to Paul Mooney, right? So we'll get into that, I hope, a little bit. But it's very unique growing up in America, where all of a sudden we have so many different cultural expressions. We are a country that, even though we pride ourselves on all being American, and as of the date we're recording this on 9/12, the day after one of the most horrific events in world history. In a time when all of our cultures kind of came together, right? But in a very real way, American cultures are very different, right? The black community, the white community, even the Italian community within the white community. Then you have the Hispanics, and so you have a very diverse world that we live in. I know for me, culture growing up, I was a mixed kid, so I kind of bounced all over the place, right? I had the great privilege and the great honor of kind of being raised in 3 different areas. Inner city of Los Angeles, which was a wild journey, right? The city of Kent, Washington, which the only thing black in my neighborhood when I first moved to Kent was a black Angus cow. That was about it. And then I also grew up in a mixed, in a weird area called Omak or Concanelli, which is essentially a ghost town that my parents would send me every summer to kind of get away from gangbanging and getting away from the trouble of the inner city of Los Angeles. And me and my sister would come up, and we would live literally in the woods in a cabin, and just play like we were country kids, and we were the only little nappy-head children running around the countryside. But we have so many different cultural backgrounds, right? I remember as a kid, Christy, my first wife, coming over to my house, and I think I shared this story with you one time. It must have been a Thanksgiving or whatever it must have been, and for the first time she came over to my house, and we're all eating, and we're in the middle of passing the food, and all of a sudden my little sister looks at me and says, "You better go get your girlfriend." And I'm like, "What are you talking about, go get my girlfriend?" She's like, "She's been on the porch crying for the last 30 minutes. And I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about? What do you mean?" So I went out there, and I shared this story with you, and I sat down on the porch with her, and I asked her what was wrong, what she was doing. She said she was waiting for her dad to come get her or something like that. And I said, "Why are you leaving?" She said, "I just don't understand. Why are you guys so angry?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? Why are we so angry? We're not angry at all. It's Thanksgiving. We're excited. We're just asking for more ham and pass the gravy." She started crying, and she's like, "I'm so sorry. It's shocking to me, right? Living in this world that I'm used to things being a certain way, and all of a sudden I'm at a whole different cultural expression." I know you've probably got 1,001 things like that from us. We're the budding of our relationship and our love. But kind of talk about that a little bit, about what it's like for interracial couples coming together, clashing of cultures, even within the black community, there's different cultural expressions, right? I'm sure within the white community. But what's that like, having an intense desire to blend cultures and make it work?
It's tough. The thing about growing up, at least in my experience being a white American, is that we're taught everybody's American, right? We're all Americans. And that in itself is the culture.
Right.
Right, because we're Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not taken into consideration the different cultures within the races within Americans.
Right.
Okay, because Americans are incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
Right, we're the melting pot, as everybody likes to say. So
Lady Liberty.
Right. So people don't take in consideration within that is multiple cultures.
Right.
Right. I always joked about when I was a kid that we kind of didn't really have a lot of culture. I was kind of envious of other races in America because I thought, gosh, they had such beautiful cultures. And I felt as a white culture where we came from, we didn't have a lot of those beautiful diversities.
Sure.
But I can say...
We've called you the hijack gender culture, right? It's kind of...
It's true.
When you look at the Caucasian community, they're great at so many different things,
right.
but they seem to hijack a lot of flavor.
It's true.
From different cultures, and there's nothing wrong with
right.
that. It's actually one of the most beautiful things when it's embraced is hijacking things from different cultures and incorporating into your own. I think the one thing that most of us don't like is that once you seem to hijack it, you seem to forget where it originally came from.
Yeah.
So we understand that. We understand that there is a little bit of an adoption of other cultures in all of us. I mean, heck, one of our favorite things in our household now is Taco Tuesdays, right? It's a cultural expression that everybody's gotten into, and we truly enjoy it as a family, and it's rewarding for us. We enjoy sitting down together, and for those 15 minutes that the food survives being on the plate, right? We're all Hispanic for a minute, and we love it, and we enjoy being with our family. But some of those cultural expressions can be challenging, right? They can not be enjoyable, but they're extremely challenging. I remember the very first time that we kind of got into a tussle, and I didn't know if we were going to make it relationally, and I hope we'll get into this point after this, but because you're yelling at me at the top of your lungs. If you'll just share a little bit about it. I was probably being a jerk, and I'm sure I was, and you probably well within your right to be pissed off, right to be angry, but we're driving down the street, and we end up pulling into a Safeway parking lot, and I'm like handing you my keys to my car, like, hey, listen, go live your life, because I'm not going to jail tonight. Share a little bit of that, and how culturally that kind of shook you, because I remember you saying for days, what was that all about? And
right. Well, one thing I do want to say, one thing that my mother said to me when I was very young, is she said that she doesn't care who I marry, right? She wants me to be happy. She wants me to be with whoever I love. So it didn't matter what race, nationality, skin color that I was with. But one thing that she said that has always actually stuck with me is she said, what you have to understand is if you marry somebody of a different race, you marry their culture as well. And she said, you have to understand that most races, their culture is very prevalent in their lives. And of course, as a small child, I didn't really get that, but I've always remembered that she said that. And it is so incredibly true.
Such good perspective.
And when you are in an interracial relationship, people go into it not really seeing that. So when you start dating and everybody's happy and you're in your honeymoon phase and you're just all lovey-dovey and life is great, but when you're actually together as a family, as a unit, and then you start to really see the differences in culture between a white and a black culture, how different we were raised in it. So like you said, for a really great example was we were fighting in the car and you pulled over and you were actually like angry, scared, kind of like, hey, like I'm not getting arrested tonight. And I'm like, what is your problem? Like literally, I was like, I don't understand what's happening right now. Like, why are you getting so crazy on me? Like literally ready to like leave the car and just walk home.
Yeah.
Because you had that fear that you're like, you don't understand. You're a white woman with a black man and we're having a fight. And that, like, I didn't understand that at all, because that didn't make sense to me. That was not something that I had ever experienced in my life. We had many moments over the years, especially in the earlier years, where you would say a lot of things and I would literally think that you were crazy. Like, I was like,
Sure.
There is no way, you are literally crazy, because that doesn't happen. Like, that's not real. Like, you're making this stuff up in your
Right.
head. Like,
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that, because the stuff that you were saying wasn't anything I'd ever experienced or really had been exposed to. And so the thought that that was real just was the furthest thing from my mind.
I can imagine. I mean, it's like you were in banking.
Right.
You were a bank teller.
Right.
So you processed hundreds of thousands of interactions with people that were Caucasian, people that were Hispanic, people that were Asian, people that were black, different backgrounds, different cultures, hip hop generation, some country folk, whatever their background might be, right? And so one of the things culturally I brought up to you was the interaction with banks.
Yep.
Right, and I remember the first time we took up the challenge of let's see who can get a check cashed, right?
Yeah.
And mine is much larger. Yeah, I make more money. It's a beautiful thing. Someday she'll be my retirement plan. But you went in with a much smaller check, right? And in the midst of it all, I go up to the teller, and of course I do the whole song and dance of what I need to do and why I'm there, and of course it takes 10 minutes for them to contact the person, right, who wrote the check, authorize, let me call you back to make sure that you are sure you want to cash this check. In the meantime, you came in after me, cashed your check before me, and waiting in the car, wondering what in the hell is going on in the world, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how those thoughts develop, right? You were raised in North Carolina. You had a beautiful family, come from 6 brothers.
I have 6 brothers. I do.
6 brothers. Big old household. I guess that's why I was entrapped. But there's a short while you're living in North Carolina. Share with the Lionheart Institute audience who raised you in that season and what you were exposed to and how that kind of affected your thinking.
So yeah, I was born in North Carolina, as I said earlier, and I've lived there for a few years, probably between ages 2 to 6, give or take. I was living there with 2 of my brothers, and we were staying with some family members. And one thing that I remember very vividly when I was little was being taught that we didn't talk to black people. And I remember being taught that they were the N-word, and
Watch
that
yourself.
they...
This is a family show now.
that, they walked on one side of the street, we walked on the other, we were not friends with them. Believe it or not, I was actually taken to a KKK meeting, and I very vividly remember that. I was probably about 4.5, 5, and it stood out so vividly in my mind. And, that was kind of the environment that I grew up in. I was not raised around many black people. The towns were still very segregated, and which you still see a lot in the South. And so, that was kind of my upbringing. And, I'll never forget when my mom moved us to Washington, and I was about 6 years old. And we were walking down the street, and I looked at my mom, and I pointed over across the street. I said, "Hey, Mommy, look, it's a N-word." And my mother, her poor face, I mean, I was only 6 years old, but I still remember this like it was yesterday, because she was appalled. Like, she was devastated. My grandparents were missionaries to Africa for 27 years, and she grew up in Africa for most of her young life.
Wow.
So, for her...
So very extreme.
Right. So racism wasn't something she believed in, she agreed with, she even thought of. So to have her daughter sit there and call a black person the N-word just devastated her.
I can only imagine.
And that is something that I remember incredibly. So, I come into Washington, which is a lot more diverse. It's a lot more diverse now, of course, than it was when I was,
Super
little.
young.
But it was definitely a culture shock, to say the least.
Let's rewind a little bit, okay? Because I've never been to a Ku Klux Klan meeting. Not that I ever plan on donning the sheets. And you're young, so I get it. There may not be true, clear pictures
Right.
of memories. But from what you can recall, right? I'm just so interested because I think that the way that we heal is by really embracing people's experiences, and sometimes that creates conflict, it creates painful memories and
Right.
dealing with a process and
Yep.
fighting it out, loving it out, whatever it kind of takes. But talk to me a little bit about, just from a child's perspective, if you can remember it at all. I'm sure you've run it through your database a little bit, kind of remembering it and thinking, what was this like? Was it full of hate? Was it full of love? Was it white pride? Was it hatred of just black people? I mean, it's kind of a unique thing, right? That you've had an experience there, and I'm
Right.
sure that there is both, right? There's probably talks of why we dislike this group or we dislike that group, but any family organization works on some kind of operation of love. Is it like a cult, or is it walk that through for me a little bit if you can?
Yeah, so it's very unique. That is definitely a good word for it. It took many years before I even realized what it was that I was at, and obviously the cloaks kind of gave it away. As I got older and I understood what that meant, then I was able to know where I was. The one thing that I really remember is it was a mixture of hate and unity.
Wow.
So it's kind of a weird concept, but I wouldn't go as far as using the word love. Definitely a lot of pride in being white.
Okay.
I remember listening and hearing everybody talk about how bad black people were. Like they were the bad guys.
Right.
So to a child's understanding, like they were people we were supposed to be afraid of because they would hurt us. And so that's what I remember hearing a lot about, that they had to protect our race because you guys were going to hurt us.
Gotcha.
And so the pride and unity is the sense of them coming together for the commonality of white supremacy. That they do believe, at least in my experience, that the white race is superior. And so they very much believe that. And they want to keep it that way.
Gotcha.
So that was kind of, it wasn't just like hate, violent stuff, but it was a lot of conversation and a lot of explaining why we hate black people, why we need to keep them in their place.
So almost an indoctrination of that principle or concept. It's kind of interesting, because I look at it and there's a lot of white supremacists that end up going to Black Lives Matter rallies or protests, and there's all kinds of craziness that's happening at these events that I believe start in the good, and tragically, in so many ways, there's nighttime corruption that seems to happen that twists it so brutally that's all we really hear about on the news. But when you talk about black pride, or we talk about power to the people, or power to black power, it's very unique for the majority of people of color. We've never looked at it as an expression of hate towards another organization, or towards whitey, or towards white America. So to kind of hear that expression of white supremacy and them really indoctrinating how evil black people are, it's kind of an interesting concept that is kind of, it reveals why when black people meet, or people of color meet, and begin to protest violence, or begin to protest the things that are happening in the world, there can be such an immediate turn of hate, because it's the only expression maybe that your meetings have ever really kind of known. And that's a challenge, right? When you are speaking two different languages, right? I'm speaking black power from the standpoint of unity and growing our community and trying to educate and trying to build and trying to prosper and trying to elevate. And then we have that dialogue with white America, who in their minds, white power has always meant black hate, right? And so it creates this cultural collision that oftentimes, unfortunately, leads to violence and hate and outbreaks of destruction of our society. it's a tragedy because, as we look at it right now, people have been, Candace Owens, for instance, which I know that you're probably no fan of. I know that there's a lot of who she is that I respect, but her message is something I could never get behind. Officer Tatum, for instance, I feel like they're not really truly black conservatives or Republicans. They're actually just mouthpieces to be weaponized against people of color. And so that's really why I really don't respect their platform. Not so much because of their stance on small government but it's this fascination, almost cult-like following of a president that is full of hate, full of vile.
Yeah.
I know this is not what this interview is all about, so I don't want to drag you into my political discussions that I get into on a regular basis that's really eating us up. But one topic that I do want you to hit, if you would be so bold to do that, is to talk just a minute about this word that's triggering so much anger across America right now, which is the word white, or the two words white privilege. When I use white privilege, of course, I don't mean it in the stance or standpoint of it gives people a free ticket over the bridge of hard work. No, I don't believe that. I think that white people have to work very hard to be successful if they want to succeed. Mm-hmm. I think very few come from 1%ers or the 10%ers or the 20% population that mom and dad just give them a free ride their entire life. I don't think that most people are inheritance babies or that they truly grow up with a silver spoon in their mouth, as it's really said, to where they're promised CEO jobs or presidencies or any of those kind of things. I think they have to work very, very hard. But there is a certain degree of white privilege that goes beyond a pathway to just immediate success, and it brings you through some pretty rocky territory that seems to disqualify people of color from making it through. So if you could just unfold that a little bit, because I know that was a word that really offended you at first when I was thrown around. But kind of express what white privilege means to you as a white person, right? And then how you've seen it expressed in the world that we live in.
Yeah, white privilege, that word invokes a lot of emotion in people. There's two words. There's Black Lives Matter and there's white privilege, and it invokes serious emotions in the white population. If you look at it, so I lived in Georgia for a little while as a single mom. I didn't have any assistance. I was not on welfare. I didn't have child support. It was literally me taking care of my son. I was working a full-time job, full-time student, full-time mom. I was not
grinding.
Yeah, just all day and all night. And that was a lot of years of blood, sweat, and a lot of tears.
Yeah.
And I did not feel privileged.
Right.
Okay, so when people hear the word white privilege, when they don't understand what that means, they're instantly offended by it.
Yeah.
Because they look at their lives and their struggles and they say, well, I didn't get a handout.
Right.
Life was difficult for me. I grew up poor. I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a single parent home. Mm-hmm. I grew up with child abuse. I was abused growing up. The list goes on.
Sure. Shared experiences to many.
Right.
Similar to people of color. Sure.
So people, when they hear that word, they just think predominantly monetary things. Okay. So that is, for me, the best way I think I can explain it, at least from my perspective, how I feel people perceive that. Because when I hear the arguments, I didn't get free money to go to college, I didn't get free handouts, I didn't get this, I didn't get that.
Sure.
It's very much a monetary thing that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. When I first understood what white privilege was very much a situation in Georgia. So as a single mom, as I said, working full-time job, my income wasn't a lot after I paid for daycare and all my expenses. So I lived in an apartment complex that was considered a lower income place. It was all I could afford to live. And when I say that I was the only white person in the complex, I genuinely mean I was the only white person in the complex.
I think that's when your awakening began.
My son and I were the only white people in this complex. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I was scared. it terrified me because I grew up believing what most Americans have believed about black people as a whole. The criminalization of black people is something that has taken heart with a lot of Americans, whether they realize it or not. And lots of times you don't even think about it till you're in a situation. All of a sudden that fear creeps in, whether it's walking past a black man, all of a sudden I'm holding my purse a little closer.
Yeah.
Or I'm kind of just scooting a little off to the side because I see a black man with a hoodie walking towards me, and all of a sudden instantly I feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And it's just subconsciously, these are natural reactions. It's not that we think about it.
I think they are natural reactions, and I think that your perspective of it is very, very powerful. Right, it's trained into us, into our psyche. It's nature versus nurture. Right, what's nurtured in us and trained by us and taught to us. I think that what's tragic and frightening right now in America is, even as a black man, I haven't recognized this level of fear in the eyes of white people for a very long time. It actually is frightening to me. Right, when you're walking down the street, or I'm jogging because I'm late to work or whatever it is, and all of a sudden there's a poor, not a poor in the sense of monetary, but poor as in weak or frail grandma in the parking lot, and I see terror in her eyes. It breaks my heart. Right, I'm just driving because I'm late for work, and this poor thing thinks I'm literally coming to devour. I don't know what's running through their minds. I turn on the television now, and I just saw on Facebook this horrible, ugly woman, angry as can be. There's a black jogger jogging by. This white gal is walking the opposite direction. She's drinking a soda pop. And all of a sudden, as the jogger runs by, she takes the soda pop and throws it at her as hard as she can. It shatters in a million directions. And this poor white gal is full of, I'm sure, her endorphins and and all of those different elements have skyrocketed at this point. She just starts cussing out this beautiful person of color that's just on a jog, and the person of color is like, what's wrong with you, right? And it's this enraged sense of fear and terror. And I do want to say that I believe America is better than this, that our presidency should be better than this, that our state government should be better than this, that our news should be better than this. We are breeding fear into people that is heartbreaking, and that fear has nowhere positive to go. It's not going to lead us to a great outcome, whatever president ends up being elected. The residue of hate, the residue of fear could be with us for a very, very long time. And so I wanted to take a moment, because I think that you're on something with this story of privilege, and I want you to get back on track there. But people, we got to get away from fear and step back into love. And realize there's a great Cat Williams segment that's going around right now. Makes me almost want to cry and laugh at the same time. But you guys have been waiting on us to be angry for 400 years. And he says we're better than that. And I believe that. We are better than that. We do not want to turn hate for hate. We know better than that. We don't want to turn the violence that's been cast upon us for so many years back upon those who have cast it upon us. We know that according to Dr. King and according to truth, right? Darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do that, right? Hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so we'll get off my soapbox a little bit so you can finish your story. But really, we have to, as a country, get back to a place of love where we stop fearing one another and we realize that this beautiful thing called life should be lived together apart from fear and hate mongering and all this BS that has captivated our country's soul and really distracted us from what we could really be as a nation if we grab on to faith, hope, and love and hold on with our dear hearts. So get back to your story of the firemen, because I'm sure this is a good one. We've got fire in the background. We've got little nappy-head beautiful children running around the place. I'm sure there's some watermelon or something.
Lots of barbecue.
Some Hennessy, whatever's going on. That's a joke, by the way, the watermelon. So tell us a little bit, what happens now? It's in the middle of the night.
So just to back up just a little bit to finish on how I felt about living there, because I think that plays a huge role in the progression of how my understanding of culture changed.
Right, that's good.
So when I moved in there, like I said, I was genuinely afraid I was literally the only white person, my son and I, living there. And the manager there put me in an apartment that was close to a couple grandmas because she thought that I'd feel safer.
Make you feel good.
It'd make me feel good, and I would feel safer there.
Grandma will take care of you. All
right. So she put us in an apartment next to them. And it took several months, honestly, before I started to not feel scared.
Right.
And when you deal with culture, as we're talking about, one thing that I was not used to is how loud Black people get. Culturally. When they're having conversations or they're mad or fighting, it goes from 0 to 100 in 5 seconds. And growing up, at least in my home, my parents didn't really fight in front of us. They fought in the bedroom. So we didn't grow up hearing parents yelling and screaming at each other, loud fights breaking out. So when somebody was really loud, they were angry. That meant something bad was going to happen.
You would always interpret that as immediate danger or potential violence, right?
For sure, 100%. It's embarrassing to admit this, but I'm all about transparency. And I remember at one point in time, there was a huge fight that broke out down in my building. 12 people out there. There was yelling, screaming, fighting going on. And I remember holding my son, who was probably about 2 years old at the time, in tears, hiding in my closet because I was terrified.
Wow.
I was like, is somebody going to start shooting? Because the first assumption that a lot of people have, unfortunately, is that, Black people have guns, And I just thought, is a bullet going to fly through my apartment window? Is somebody going to break into my apartment? These were things that I was genuinely scared of. But, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have enough income to live anywhere else. So I was stuck there. But one thing I began to learn was how loving the community was. As terrible as that sounds, it was surprising.
Right.
It was so unexpected. And I remembered these little kids that would come up and, hey, can I help you carry in your groceries? Or, these young teenagers or young adult men would be like, hey, do you need some help? Let me help you with that. Awesome. And they would carry my groceries into the house. I was on crutches from a surgery at one point in time, and they would always, hey, do you need any help today? And the grandmas next door, oh my gosh, love them. Logan would go over there and play with the little kids there. They'd be like, oh, honey, just let them come over. You need a break. And they just open their doors. It was beautiful. One thing I learned, that they'll give you the shirt off their back. You don't have to know somebody to show up for a barbecue. Literally, they will invite a stranger off the street and say, hey, come eat with us. Mm-hmm. That's not something that I was
community
used
and
to.
relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
In most of my life, with most of the community, we don't know our neighbors. We don't even bother to get to know our neighbors. Now, that's not, of course, with every community, and I'm not saying that that's all across the board. But
sure.
In my experience, a lot of places that I've lived, people don't want to get to know their neighbors. So there isn't that open, they don't care who you are. They don't have to know you. Mm-hmm. Just come on in, take what you need type of a thing.
The concept is, right, you can't be my enemy if we become friends.
Right.
So building community and reaching out and loving is just part of what we naturally want to do, because we want to embrace the best of us and embrace the worst of us. Many people, unfortunately, when a tragedy happens and a person of color is shot, one of the first things that they do is they go down the checklist of all the evil things that they've done, right?
Yeah.
The first time they stole a car or a toy car in kindergarten, right? But for us, we love the best of us and we love the worst of us, right? We want to embrace the entirety of our community, because we know that we rise together and we fall together. And so I guess being from the minority group, it's always been easier. Now I'm thankful because my mom is white. Mm-hmm. So I had the privilege of kind of growing up in the hood with a white mom that was doing the same thing as our people of color neighbors were doing. And so she taught me very early. So I never developed that same kind of bias.
Yeah.
There was some hatred, there was some anger, there was some bitterness towards those who treated us bad, but not that same kind of deep guttural fear, right?
Right.
That it sounds like you had to overcome.
Right.
And when you're overcoming that, right, and you have all these assumptions,
yeah,
obviously, and then someone turns around and says to you, you have white privilege. I can see how that could scramble your brain, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I've lived in the same neighborhood you lived in. What the hell are you talking about, right? So unfold that for me a little bit, that picture of it.
So here's a really great, clear example.
And I think it's so good because I don't think that you realize how often these things happen.
Yeah.
And so unfold it.
So one night, I get this knock on my door. It's probably 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'm sound asleep and I'm disoriented and I hear somebody banging on my door.
Like one of these brothers has finally come to collect on bringing these groceries in the house.
Oh my gosh. I was like, what is going on? So I go answer the door and there's a firefighter there banging on my door saying, he's like, hey miss, there's a fire. You need to get out of the apartment right away. And so, of course, instant panic comes in because I've got a toddler asleep. And I'm like, okay. So I asked the firefighter, I said, okay, how much time do I have? Because in my mind, I'm thinking I've got to get me dressed, my son dressed. It's cold outside. It's the middle of the night. How much time do I have? And he got so nasty with me and says, well, I don't care. Stay there if you want, but you need to get out. There's a fire. And I was so taken back by his aggression and hostility towards me that I genuinely just didn't know how to process that. So anyway, he slams the door and he's, of course, going on to the next apartment. And I'm getting myself dressed real fast because I don't genuinely know how much time I've got, like how big this fire is. Yeah. So I'm moving as fast as I can, getting Logan and I dressed, getting us out there. So I get us down the stairs, and of course, everybody from my building, everybody's, out there. We're all on the grass.
So you got several hundred people
right,
out there.
Right. There's a ton of people out there, and we're sitting in the grass. It's cold. I've got a blanket wrapped around me and Logan, and we're watching these flames, right? These firefighters trying to take out these flames. So at one point in time, the firefighter that had come knock on my door, who was really rude to me, he was coming down the stairs and all of a sudden he stops and he looks at me and he has this almost perplexed look on his face when he's looking at me and my son. And he comes over and he says, ma'am, I'm so sorry. He's like, I just had a lot going on. He's like, it's really cold. Would you and your son like to come sit in the fire truck so you don't have to be out here in this cold weather? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be amazing. Logan loved fire trucks. He had a fire hat at home and he just loved them. And so there was like 5 or 6 fire trucks at the time there. So he took us over to the fire truck that he was on and he let us sit in there. It was the first time I'd ever been on a fire truck too. And Logan was super excited. So he was having the time of his life. And so we were sitting there out of the cold, being warm. Probably took about an hour before we were able to go back inside. So they started finally letting people in there. Powerful. And, at the time, I didn't think anything of it, right? You just don't, you don't think anything of it. Probably over the next few days, I started kind of thinking about the situation. Right. And I realized that something hit me. I was the only person that got asked to go sit in a fire truck. Yeah. So as I'm sitting in there with my son, I'm looking at all the other people with their small children, and they're sitting out in the cold.
Did you say there's 10 kids out there, 20, 50?
Oh, probably, yeah, easily. I would say there's probably was at least a dozen children, ranging from babies, on up. Right. And the thought came to me, I thought, I'm not understanding why, one, his attitude changed after he saw me and my son alone out there. And then all of a sudden, it hit me. And I realized that when he first opened my door, there was an assumption that I was there with a black man, right? Because pretty much everybody there was black. Sure. But then when he sees my very white son and me, then all of a sudden his total demeanor changed. And all of a sudden he was super nice, super kind, said, hey, let me help you. But I was the only person he helped. He didn't make that offer to anybody else. And that was the moment when I understood what white privilege meant. Right. It's not a monetary thing, because that in itself is a whole different issue and a different topic. Sure. But it's about...
And active and real.
Right,
and,
right, for sure. Because everybody, no matter whether you're white, Asian, Hispanic, black, doesn't matter. There is all levels to financial stability.
Sure.
Right. So there's going to be poor white people, poor Asian people. It's across the board. So for a person who lives in that level, to hear white privilege makes us angry.
Uh-huh.
Right. But that is the moment that I realized what it meant. That it wasn't a monetary thing. It was being treated like a human being.
Sure.
It was that moment to where it's the expectation that people are going to just treat us like human beings.
Right.
They're going to extend that kindness because it's the right thing to do.
It's powerful. This is a powerful insight that you have. A lot of people don't realize that when I was very young, I played sports, of course, and then got into football. Well, one of the things that saved my football career and actually ended up giving me a tremendous opportunity at the next level was 16 kids got kicked off of my football team when I was a sophomore. So I went from being third string to first string with nobody to beat me out, right? But the only reason that happened is because I understood conceptually that if I got caught at a party, then my career was going to be over.
Right.
And so it would have been over before it began. And yes, here's what a lot of people, when I say white privilege, I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that there's no consequences to being white.
Right.
Right. I'm not saying that you don't have to fight hard to get rich. I'm not even saying that you're not going to get punished. The difference is this. For me, if I would have been one of the 16 who got kicked off, I wouldn't have been given the same second chance opportunity that the white kids that were, some of them were my very best friends, but I had to understand I don't have the same privilege. So I left the party. Unfortunately for me, they ended up getting caught at the party, getting kicked off the team, but because of their ethnicity, they ended up getting a second chance, where I doubt that second chance would have ever been given to me. Now, it may have been given to me by the coaches or by the athletic directors, but from a community standpoint, it wouldn't have been. I wouldn't have been looked at the same way. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, my daily routines would have been so drastically changed because I didn't have that same privilege that I may never have played sports again. Right, and so your insight on that fire truck is very powerful. It's very self-reflective, which empowers you, because now it comes around to the topic that really infuriates people when they think that we're asking for an apology. Right? They think that people of color are asking them because they have white privilege, that you're supposed to feel sorry for, I don't know, sorry for yourselves, sorry for us. What is that mindset, or how were you taught as a child, and then how have you experienced it now as an adult, where there's this idea that people of color are asking you for an apology or to feel guilty about being white, which none of us really, I mean, I don't know, maybe some people out there are, but I know that I've never felt that towards a person of white skin. You should feel guilty, and you should feel ashamed, and you should be embarrassed, and you should just give to me because of the color of your skin. Right? How have you interpreted that? And how has that empowered you really in moving forward in relationships with people of color and so forth? So you don't ever walk with your head held low, right? You still hold your head high, love who you love, and proud of who you are. But how's that experience been for you?
It's interesting because, having my early experience being in the South and dealing with the racism there and the segregation and how truly unique it is living in the South. Which again was my experience when I was in Georgia as an adult. That was very eye-opening and mind-blowing to live in Washington most of my life and then going to a place where things are still very segregated and there's still very much dislike.
And then let's name drop just a little bit.
Yeah.
Share this is a great story, so share the Paul Mooney story as well if you could.
So my mom worked in Hollywood when I was little for a little bit. And she got to meet and became really good friends with Paul Mooney.
And the Paul Mooney.
The right? Paul Mooney, yes.
Richard Pryor, Paul Mooney.
Richard Pryor, Paul Mooney.
All right.
And so I grew up hearing about him. When I was about 8 years old, I was living in Washington, and my mom tells me, she's like, hey, Paul Mooney's flying into town. He's got something he's doing.
The Paul Mooney.
The Paul Mooney.
All right.
And we're going to go have lunch with him. Because he had heard all about us kids, right, and wanted to meet us. And so, I was... I met
the Commodores as a kid, but to meet Paul Mooney, shit, it would change my whole direction of life. I'd have been like, I need a joke book right now. There's another Richard in town.
Right. So we go to Bellevue. He's staying at this big, huge hotel in Bellevue. And I remember walking in, and this hotel was massive. Right. Of course, I was only 8 years old, but it was still huge. And we're sitting in the lobby because we're waiting for him to come down. And all I knew was that he was black. Okay, that was it. That was all I knew about Paul Mooney. I mean, it's weird because I always kind of saw him almost like family because of his relationship with my mom. So I kind of always heard about him. So it always felt like I knew him, but I just knew he was black.
You just thought Black Jesus was coming down the staircase.
So I remember sitting in the lobby, sitting on this couch, and literally every black man that walked down out of the elevator would be like, Mommy, is that him? Is that him? No, honey. And I'd see another black man in a nice suit walking out the elevator. Mommy, is that him? No. And she looked at me and she said, when you see him, you'll know it's him.
Right.
Now, I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I was 8 years old. I had no idea. And I will never forget the moment he walked out the elevator.
You knew.
You knew. He was massive. I mean, of course, I was a little girl, so he was larger than life. And he was wearing it was either alligator or snakeskin boots and a snakeskin hat. And I think it was some kind of leather, definitely not a suit, okay? Let me just say, not a suit. And I remember, I was reaching over tapping my mom. I was like, Mommy, is that him? And I sounded like I was probably terrified because he was larger than life and not what I was expecting. And he had this big voice and this deep voice. And my mom started smiling. She's like, yeah, honey, that's him. And we went and we had lunch with him. And I just remember being mesmerized by this man, just mesmerized by him, because it was really my first interaction with a black man on an actual level. And I was just in awe over this man. And, I grew up knowing about him. I ended up actually being pen pals with one of his daughters for a very long time throughout school. And,
wow.
I remember he used to send us his CDs and his comedy shows, even though they're probably highly inappropriate for us to listen to. I just remember listening to him, and he was truly my first experience, positive experience for sure, getting to know a person that was black.
Yeah. And he, of course, is a great comedian.
Yeah.
Come up with so many great jokes for so many great artists over the years. Did he ever cause you to feel shame or guilt, or?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He was great. He was just, every interaction I ever had with him, whether it was with my mom or times where I called and talked to him on the phone a few times, he was like family. That's how I perceived him. He was family. I didn't see him as a black man that was scary. He was kind to us, and he was, he was like our uncle. That was probably the best way to describe it.
So now you have these very diverse experiences with people of color, right? Paul Mooney, fire truck, Georgia, raising a single mother in a pretty much people of color community, right? And here you are, blue-eyed, blonde hair, Logan the same, and now you are back into Washington. You've decided to move back as we get closer, and you and I are in a relationship, right? So you've had an evolution of becoming awakened to the world that you live in, right? Can you express kind of what that feels like? Maybe, I don't know, the way that I've heard it said, it's kind of like a turtle coming out of its shell, and it's still fully intact, but now all the things that once protected it, the fear, the anxiety, the hate, the blame, the assumption that we want you to feel guilty and be embarrassed, now all of a sudden you're out in the world with a very different perspective of the society you live in. it's got to be very vulnerable, right? Because now all of a sudden you're dealing with a world that you once perceived from one direction.
Right.
However, now you're seeing it in an entirely different world. How do you not get too carried away on social media? How do you process these emotions as you're waking up to them? What do you feel like? How I know obviously us getting married and getting together, having children together, it's part of that awakening process. But for the person that doesn't have that, the Caucasian person that's living with a Caucasian spouse and they're living a good life, but they don't want to have the residue of hatred or the residue of racism on their life. What are things that you started embracing and studying for yourself that really woke you up to the world that we live in, and how did that impact you? A lot to unfold.
It's intense. The best way to describe it is intense. And for the first part of our relationship, as I said earlier, I really thought you were crazy. I genuinely didn't understand some of the things that you had brought up, because I had never had to deal with that. I had never treated anybody like that personally. So for me, the thought that other people did was shocking, genuinely shocking. You make the assumption, however, you think everybody else thinks like that too.
Sure.
So when people talk about racism and they talk about slavery and they talk about all these things that we learn about in history, or the whitewashed version of history, it's all downplayed to where you don't really feel any emotions about it.
That's powerful.
Okay, so when we talk about slavery, it's a very short thing, and we watch the Roots movie, and that's about the extent of it. It's very downplayed, and you don't hear what really went on, or the damage that was done, not only to this country, but to Black people as a whole, and their family units and their communities and everything. So
I would go beyond that and say even to white America.
Right.
I think that the scar tissue that is got to build up in the soul of a person that is that abusive, that neglectful of a human life, it's got to do something very deep in your own psyche and in your own thought process of the world that you live in, and the narcissistic approach that you view the world through your lenses, and how that affects you. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it damaged us deeper than we really believe.
100%. I believe it damaged America as a whole.
The greatest country in the world.
Right. So,
or at least the capacity to be the greatest country in the world.
So when you grow up with this more washed white version of history, or being taught that, there is no such thing as white privilege. You guys have all the same privileges as we do. There is literally nothing different. So we don't understand why you're so angry. Because we're always growing up, you always hear about the angry Black man, right? That stigma of the angry Black man. So why are you so angry? Right? Like, I don't understand. You can go do the same things I can do. So why are you so angry? And the why are you blaming me for something that happened 4 years ago? I didn't have anything to do with that. So, like,
it was just 4 years ago. I know you meant to say 400.
I said 400. 400, so we're clear. Right. So I just didn't understand why I was being blamed for something that I had no control over.
Sure.
But as you grow and you learn, and having your eyes open, and as we've talked about, my story is very across the board, right? Of all angles, you learn to understand that the picture is so much bigger than what you could imagine it was.
Wow.
And I'll never forget the moment that I felt broken. And as we were together and we had children together, there's a definite different feeling that comes when I look at our mixed children versus when I look at Logan, because I see the struggles that they are going to deal with that may be different than Logan. But Logan struggles too, because he's having to learn what it's like in a Black family when he's not Black, and he doesn't understand how the effects of that either. So we're having to really learn how to help our children of Black and white, and you start to feel a little bit differently because all of a sudden your fears that you didn't know you had, because it wasn't relevant to you, all of a sudden now it's relevant, because now you have children that the world sees as Black. Now people will say, Tiffany, your kids are light skinned, people may not even know they're Black. But let me tell you something. The first time I took them to an appointment and I had to fill out paperwork and it asked for their race and I put white and African American and they took off the white part. And I looked at them and I said, excuse me, why are they just African American? And I was like, they're white too. Like, why is,
Sure.
like, I didn't understand. Like, why were they taking that away and just calling my children black? Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, well, this is just normal. You know, we go with whatever the minority, you know,
Sure.
race is. And that was the first time it hit me that the world looks at my children differently.
Even though technically we call them 100% black, right? Because
Right.
that's our pride in,
Right,
in
right.
what they are, or 100%
Right.
white. It doesn't really matter. But truthfully, they're more Caucasian because
Right.
of my mom
For sure.
than they are.
So they're
Even
like
African
3/4 Caucasian, a
Right.
fourth African American, but the world sees them as black.
Right. And that stigma, that title
Yes.
becomes a weight, right? As
Yeah.
you begin to study what's happened through history. So keep unfolding that for us. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. So when you have children that are mixed, then you start to see the world in a little different way, because not that you see it, but it's put on you. Mm-hmm. You are exposed to it because the world just sees it differently.
Yeah.
And so whether you want it to or not, you are going to be exposed to things you've never known.
Yeah.
Especially
it's so suddenly.
Right. Especially coming from a white mom married to a black man with mixed children. So whether you're ready for it or not, it's going to come on you like a ton of bricks. So when we had Jax and Hannah, that was the first time I really started to feel this, like, just pain in my heart at how people are treated.
Sure.
And I thought, well, how do I protect my children? And one of the things that, like I said, I remember the moment where I truly felt broken in understanding the world that we live in. And you and I were sitting and we were watching 13th off Netflix. And I remember halfway through that, I literally was bawling. I couldn't hardly breathe.
Sure.
And I look over and like, you seem completely unfazed. And I'm like, here
Right.
I am. And I'm sobbing uncontrollably. But I realize it's because you're used to it. You already knew this
Sure.
stuff existed. You already saw the world this way.
It's what you thought was insane about me.
Which is what the things I thought was crazy about you. That couldn't possibly be real. But you already knew it was. So this wasn't anything new to you, but for me it was new. Mm-hmm. And I truly felt broken inside because I thought, how could our country have done this?
Right.
How could we have done this to you guys? And when people say, I wasn't personally responsible for slavery, but if you do not recognize racism today and the systemic form and everything that goes on, you are contributing to it. So therefore, you are still responsible.
It's powerful.
For the continuation of racism. So whether you are racist or whether you feel that you are participating, if you aren't helping, you're still contributing.
Your silence is compliance.
100%. And that was the moment I felt so much pain and sorrow that my white race did this. And I thought, how could they have done this to people? We're all humans. We're all people. Like, how can you treat people this way? And how can you treat people this way and have gotten away with it for so long, convincing an entire country that it wasn't really real? Mm-hmm. Now, I want to be very clear because this is a topic that comes up a lot in social media. I am not ashamed for being white.
That's good.
I do not hate being white. I do not feel guilty for being white. Nobody is asking us to do that, to feel that way. And a common misconception is if I say Black Lives Matter, or if I say that systemic racism is real and police brutality is real, then that means I somehow need to apologize for being white. Then I need to somehow feel guilty that I'm white. But that is not the case at all. It is okay to be proud of who you are and where you come from and your culture and the diversity because it's beautiful. So people need to stop taking that on, especially within white Americans, saying, if I agree to this and I say Black Lives Matter, then somehow my life isn't important anymore. That I need to be sorry that I'm white.
Right.
But that is not what people are asking. That is not what people of color are wanting from us as white America. They're not saying you need to be sorry that you're white.
So good.
So it's okay to be proud that you're white and still say Black Lives Matter. So I would say that was probably the real awakening for me to understand what, as a mother, I was going to be up against for my family.
What you just brought us through is extremely powerful. I think that the journey you took is a painful one. It's a beautiful one. But bringing you to a place of awareness of the journey that people of color have been on in America is very enlightening and very empowering. When it comes to the topic of the question, do Black Lives Matter? I heard T.D. Jakes preach a very powerful message the other day, and I just caught a very short segment of it. But the crust of it was this. When we say Black Lives Matter, for you to get the question right, you have to check the right box. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
You have to know the context of the question, because to give a right answer to the wrong question means that you're actually going to get an F on the paper. So when I say all lives matter, the response should be absolutely. When I say Black Lives Matter, it should equally be absolutely. Right? And I think that is where so many of us are lost today in understanding. To get the answer right, we have to begin with the right question, right? And the question is do you value human life? Do you value people? And do you value this beautiful place we call America enough to grow, to overcome our self-deception, overcome the things that we've bought into that have been a lie for so very long? As a history major, it's one of my majors being history. I've studied it from all perspectives, right? And truthfully, the story of history is written by the one who's the victor, his story, right? And that's really what we hear. And in America today, it's a predominantly male chauvinistic voice that's written our history, that wants us to view white men as gods. And I'm not saying this to tear white men down,
Right.
But we put them in a place where they seem as kings or as gods or untouchable, right? We see presidents or the one percenters or elite CEOs as untouchable, and really they're just human beings, right? So undoubtedly, people are going to ask me, right? Putting these two beautiful babies in your belly. I have a specialty at it. I have 3 children before these 3. And I seem to be phenomenal at it. That's why I've cut off the river flow. No more children out of the great Nile. We're not going to do that. But the experience of being a single mom for so long, okay? Logan, jewel of your heart, apple of your eye, right? Yeah. You love this boy to death, but you're doing it on your own. It's hard. We get together, right? You've given up on the hope of having other children. You're just getting too old. I'm just kidding. But this spark and this dream of having, really, Jax became a beautiful consequence. But you had this vision or this belief that you were going to have a fairly dark-skinned, curly-haired little girl that was an angel, right? And so we have Jax, and then we have Hannah. But what's that like? I mean, you know, obviously we've heard the experience of black mothers who have, unfortunately, and I knock on wood because God forbid this ever happened to my children, right? It's heartbreaking. I can hardly hold it together thinking about it. But what is that like, having mixed kids, that the world will eventually probably, other than the way that they look, judge as completely black? Right. And growing up with that fear and that anxiety and that uncertainty about the world that we live in, how's that changed your perspective? And really, how's that made you a different person than you once were?
I remember when we were pregnant with Jax, and Logan was 5 about 5 at the time. And I remember us, having conversations with him to kind of prepare him that his sibling was going to look different.
Yeah.
And, this is the beautiful thing.
And you never know what they're going to pop.
The beautiful thing about genetics, and what you see a lot with a lot of mixed white and black babies, is you have them across the spectrum of colors.
You do, right.
From blonde afro hair to light skin, dark skin. I mean, just beautiful arrays of everything.
Blue eyes, green eyes,
so you
dark
don't
brown
know.
eyes, black eyes, yeah.
So we were having to prepare Logan so he would understand that his brother was not going to look like him.
Yeah.
Like, that much we knew. He wasn't going to come out more than likely blonde hair, blue eyes, and definitely not light skin like the two of us. And so we kind of had to start that conversation to prepare him, to get him to understand that there was going to be differences between him and Jax. And with having Logan, I never had fear for him.
Wow.
In raising him. There was never the fear of letting him go out and play with his friends. There was never the fear of him going somewhere and having to worry that he may not come back home. There was just a comfort zone that we lived in because that was expected. Like, it was just expected.
Kids go to play at the park and they come home.
So when I had Jax, and then we had Hannah shortly after, all of a sudden, what I felt was very different for them. And parents joke all the time that they have a favorite child here and there, but it's not a favoritism, it's a different feeling that you get for each of your children. And with Jax and Hannah, all of a sudden now I felt the need to protect them. Something I had not experienced with Logan. And the more I understood about how America was going to see them, and the challenges that they were going to face in growing up being black in America, all of a sudden, that's a whole nother level of fear that I had never experienced before. The fear of, what if my son is out playing basketball with other kids? And let's say, Jax is fairly light-skinned, beautiful brown tan that he gets, but what if he's out with other kids that are darker than him, right? Which he will be, right? He's going to, his little friend Kingston is darker than him. He's mixed too, but he's darker than Jax. And so what if they're teenagers and they're out playing basketball together and cops decide to stop and just see what they're up to? All of a sudden, the fear that something could happen to my son was devastating.
Solely based on ethnicity.
Strictly based on the fact of his ethnic color.
Yeah.
And his skin color, and something that I find so beautiful about him that somebody else would find so ugly and hateful. And the very things that I love that he got from you, both of our children got from you, are the things that distinguish them to be different from the Caucasian world. And that difference alone will single them out. And that fear is truly like nothing I've ever experienced. And when I look at society right now, especially with everything going on, there is so much hate out there. And sometimes I hold them and I just cry. And I just hold them and I just think to myself, how can I give you a better world? Because you deserve a better world. At what point are you going to go from being adorable children to being a threat? And I can't protect them from that. And that is a horrible feeling.
And yet, you could be the white mom that ushers them into a back corner and never gives them access to their community. And that's equally as terrifying.
It's tough.
So how do you, obviously you have a very strong black man to make sure that never happened. Right. However, knock on wood, something negative happened to me.
Right.
You know my expectation. You know what the expectation is of your heart now. All that fear about what could happen, yet that feeling of necessity to introduce them to their culture and let them have full access to their culture. Right. How does that make you feel? I know it's a little bit of a vulnerable question, right? Where people, even black people, white people, they could all judge you based on your response. But keeping it raw and real.
Yeah.
How do you balance that out the joy of knowing who they are, and yet the danger of putting them in a position of knowing who they are, which means they associate with who they are, which means it makes them a target.
I remember hearing a lot of people who were mixed, we'll use African American right now, white and black, but they would never claim their white side. They always said they're black, and that used to upset me because I was white. I was like, you not proud being white? Like, you got a problem with your white side? I didn't understand. Like, that used to really bother me because, and when we first had Jackson, I was still very protective of that white heritage, that's important because he's part white too, you know?
Sure.
But then I began to understand.
You better know how to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Right. I began to understand the biggest thing is when you have mixed children, especially, culture is vital to help them to learn who they are and where they come from. Because the reality is both of our families have tremendous history of where we came from.
Sure.
You know, I want them to know your father's heritage and what that was like growing up black in Alabama, because that in itself is a story.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so important to his culture and our children's heritage. And I think, especially being a white mom, I know that there's a lot of talk down on us raising black children.
Sure.
And because what do we know?
Right. How do you know how to pick out an afro?
Right. How do we know how to take care of black hair? How do we know how to teach them anything related to their culture, the importance of that? Because it's very different than what we're raised at. And I will tell you, it's not easy. And I don't know everything. And I'm still learning every day. But it is important to continue to learn. It is having that open mind to say, you know what? I don't know everything.
It's good.
And you know, honestly, the whole concept of it takes a village, I would love a village of black moms that could step in and say, hey, what do you need?
Right.
You know, just to help educate me, help me learn the things that maybe I'm missing because I just don't know and I don't understand. And it's a horrible feeling, and I remember it to where I felt glad that our children were light-skinned. And then I felt horribly guilty that I felt glad about it.
Sure.
Because I love your skin and your family and the beautiful black color that you are. And I think that I love that. I want that in our children. So it was being so conflicted because I wanted them to look just like you. But I was happy they looked more like me because I realized at some point the black side of them was going to create challenges for them.
Sure.
And it's an awful place to be, especially as a white mom trying to raise mixed children and get them to be able to understand diversity and culture because you want so badly for them to have the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult, especially with the way the world sees black and white right now, for them to be able to have the best of both worlds.
It's so powerful. And here you are. You've got a whole generation of white people now that go around saying, I don't see color.
Right.
We know that's not true.
Right.
Okay? We know it's not true by the kids they invite to the parties and the kids they don't invite to the parties. The kids that they want to play basketball on their basketball team and the kids that they don't invite, right? And so forth and so on. But how do you process all that, right? Because I've seen you intentionally seek out people of color for relationships in your life that I'm assuming, yes, it's for you as a woman. Every woman needs a relationship with people like them, and just because they're a different skin tone doesn't mean that they're not like you. They're just like you, struggling with the same things you struggle with, right? So it's very important that a woman has a relationship with other women and so forth. But also, I would assume for our kids as well, your intentionality. How do you deal with that concept of being colorblind, right? When color is really so beautiful, so diverse, and really we should focus on color without excluding people based on their color. How do you approach that? And
so what I notice is that people, well, Caucasians specifically, because that's my people, so I'm going to use them for example. But what I have noticed is people who say I'm not racist, right? I love everybody. I treat everybody equally. I don't see color. I raise my children to not see color. So to you, I say, please stop teaching your children to not see color, because it is not helping. Okay? The truth of the matter is, when you teach your children to not see color, they lose the value
So good.
of people of color. So we are all different. Americans is not one race of, we are a race of people as far as we're Americans, but we are all different, and that is what makes us beautiful. So when we teach our children, and while you know what, God bless you, because I know you're trying to teach your children to accept everybody and not teach them hate, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But teach them to see color and the beauty in color and the diversity in that, and that everybody is valued equally, but still can be different.
So good.
And I think that is one of the biggest issues that I see with a lot of people who, you know, they're genuinely trying to help, right? They're trying to build a better America and stop racism and help with all the prejudice going on. And so to them, this is how they're helping. But the truth is, if you want to help, teach them to see the beauty and the value in human life and the individuality of every person and their skin color and their culture, because it's a beautiful thing. It is what makes America so unique, is the acceptance of it and understanding that everybody is different, and that's a great thing. And we are not all colorblind. We are not all translucent. I may be translucent, but you know, we are not all meant to be the same. And that is something that, if you want to truly help fight against racism, teach people to value it, to value the differences and the skin colors of every individual, because it's a beautiful thing. And I will always teach my children to see color. And you know what? I've been called racist for that very thing, because I'm making it about race. But America's already made it about race. They've already made a very big stand on how they feel about race. This country was founded on racism and slavery. And so they've already made it very clear what they think of that. But we as Americans need to start seeing the value of color.
It's good.
So when we
cultural diversity,
right?
Yeah.
When people are saying we're making it about color, we're making it about race, it needs to be about color, and it needs to be about race, and it needs to be about why it's a good thing.
It's beautiful.
Not why it's a bad thing and why we shouldn't talk about it. No, we should talk about it, and we should get to know people who look different than us.
Anytime you make something taboo, you make it dangerous.
Right.
And by making color taboo, you make that dangerous.
Yes.
And so, you know, you're causing there to be divisions and cracks that aren't necessary, when you can just recognize that everything on the planet has color.
Yep.
And it is what makes it so beautiful and so amazing, from the sunsets to the color of flowers to the skin tone of a person.
Yeah.
I've not even ever met two black people. I'm moving away from using the word black, moving away from using the word African American, and to more using people of color. But you've never seen two people of color look the same.
No.
You've never even seen two white people look the same. And so while we're teaching our children to be colorblind, by making them color aware and appreciative, they're going to get so much more value out of diversity. And that diversity is going to cause there to be prosperity and blessing and favor that flows. Because the more connected you are, the better off you are, right?
Right.
And so we have all this hate going on social media right now. And I fight nail and tooth with a lot of people based on political views. But the scary thing to me is that these are political views that are getting wrapped into racial views and ethnic opinions and cultural division and separation and hatred and fear-mongering, that we hate Mexicans and we hate African Americans, and whether it's, you know, the Ku Klux Klan or white supremacists, we want to pretend that we are fearful of minorities, but they're very fine people.
Right.
And I think it's important for us to realize, as we've tried to teach our children to be colorblind, right, and really abuse that concept, the number one threat according to Homeland Security, has become white supremacy.
Right.
And so we colorblind our world down so much to where the enemy of our nation isn't Black Lives Matter. It's not Antifa. It's not Antifa or whatever it's called. It's not fascism. It's not Marxism. They have labeled white supremacist groups as the number one threat to the stability of our country. And that's fueled by someone or something in a political place that's inciting them and making them think that it's okay. Mm-hmm. I believe that if we as a country will stand up and begin to have difficult conversations,
right,
conflict conversations, painful conversations, where we're just at the edge of calling each other out of our names, but then we treat people with respect and we seek to first understand rather than to be understood, that conflict will breed for us and bring forth for us the opportunity to really fulfill what our paper has always made us look like, which is the greatest country in the world.
You know, and the truth is that, and I'm going to say this, white America, be prepared to be uncomfortable. Okay? We have been comfortable for way too long. And the truth is, in order for there to be change, people are talking about how violence solves nothing, right? These riots, it doesn't stop. So be prepared to be uncomfortable, and those will stop.
Yeah.
Okay? If you are willing to take the opportunity to say, I am so not okay with this conversation, but I need to have this conversation, we will start to see change.
Come on, America.
Because you have to have an open mind. And the truth is, within the diversity and the culture differences are going to come tough conversations. Because let me tell you, the first few years we were together, I didn't understand half the stuff he said. And that is the honest truth. I was like, what? Like, seriously, that is the culture differences, just to how he has conversations and I have conversations. I didn't even understand him at the time. I literally had to be like, what? Like, I don't understand what you're saying right now. So be prepared to have those conversations and be honest and be like, you know what? I don't really understand. I don't understand you. I don't understand what you're saying. I need you to help explain it to me. And have patience. And remember that we are different and we're coming from different cultures and different backgrounds. But it's okay. It is okay to have those differences, but those are the conversations we need to have. We have to get out of our comfort zone, America, because white America has been comfortable for too long, and they are accepting racism at a highest level. Because it's not smack in their face enough to where it's disrupting their lives, but now it's disrupting their lives. Now I see time and time again, people are upset about sports. People are upset about the riots. People are upset about the protesters. Nothing to be done is going to make them happy unless it all just goes away. But the truth is, it's not going away. So until we get down on a level with each other, a level where we are showing love and compassion, and we are trying to genuinely understand, and we're not going in with our own opinions and our own anger already ready to spew, because that's what's happening right now on social media. You post one comment and oh my goodness, 30 people are just spewing hate and anger and their own opinions and why you're a liar and why you're racist and why you're blah, 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 blah. I've been called racist more times in the last week by white people than I have in my entire life. And I am not racist. But that is the hate and the anger that's out there right now, that people just will not open their mind to the possibility that there is a different world out there. And I had a conversation with somebody that literally, you are entitled to have your opinions. And if you choose to believe that racism isn't real, police brutality isn't real, that's okay. You have the right to choose to believe that. But do not call somebody else racist for saying it exists. Do not hate on somebody and show no compassion for people who suffer through it. So there is a difference between saying, I don't believe it, and calling somebody a racist because they do. Because every day, whether you believe it or not, people experience it. You may not, but somebody else is. So have compassion for them and understanding that your life is not their life. And when we can start to do that, we can start to see change.
I think it's very powerful once you recognize that it's okay to say, hey, you know what, I might not have it all figured out.
Right.
There may be things that in my 20s, my 30s, my 50s hell, maybe even my 70s, I can still discover about the world that we live in, and you begin to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, let's have dialogue and see if I can learn something new. That's really when you have the power. That's really when you have the ability to be empowered and really continue to grow and mature. And if you really are about making America great, like you talk about, making America great at its fundamental level of love, care, and concern from other people is really what will elevate this nation to great heights. We have a great economic plan at capitalism. It drives those who want to succeed in an insane amount of force, right? We have a great political system in that we are a republic. And we are a republic, a democratic republic, where we let the people vote and in general get a consensus about what the people want. We have a very powerful, probably, I think, the oldest living constitution for any country on the planet right now, even though we're a fairly young nation, right? But where we've lacked is we've lacked in love and respect and a genuine concern for one another. And you say that's not my responsibility. I get that. But it's also not going to lead to your prosperity, your blessing. Listen, it's knocking at the front door. It's knocking. These conversations are knocking at your door, knocking at your children's doors. So what we would be wise to do is allow the veil of hate, the veil of misunderstanding, the veil of confusion, the veil of division. Let's just let it come down. And whatever conversations come as a result of it, let's go through that painful, uncomfortable process. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you that will do more good than the hate's doing right now in the world that we live in.
I think it's important to remember we are leaving a legacy for our children. And you have to ask yourself, is this the world we want to leave them?
So good. Because
right now, all I see is hate and anger and people being offended left and right by certain words or certain letters, and they hear that and anger just comes forth and just spews venom out at people, and then there's no conversation. There's zero conversation because people are unwilling to listen to the idea or the possibility that what they believe may be wrong, and it's okay to say maybe I'm wrong. Most people don't like to admit that, but sometimes we have to say, I think I might have been wrong. Hey, I was an all lives matter person at one point in time too, because I didn't understand why Black Lives Matters is so important. Because I didn't know that there was a difference, but there's a difference. But I was willing to open my mind and my heart to see a different side, a different story, a different perspective. So when I think about our beautiful children, black, white, I think about what kind of world do I want them to grow up in? What kind of world do I want to leave them? And right now, this world is so full of hate. My anxiety has been off the charts because I have so much compassion and love for people that I can't handle so much hate being spewed at myself from other people, because I choose to say I believe that Black lives matter. I believe my children's lives matter. I believe your children's lives matter and your lives matter. But people become so angry and offended so instantaneously that they are unwilling to just listen. So when you think about an argument that you're about to have with somebody because they said something that instantly turns you hot, take a moment to say, what are they really trying to say?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people, we are leaving this country to our children. And this is not the America I want to raise my children in. I want to give them a better place of love and hope and compassion and humanity. People have lost the sense of humanity, of what that even means. But I'm raising my children to believe in that, because God created this world for us, and He gave us hope, and He gave us love, and He gave us compassion. And so I choose to use that to teach my children to understand that, you know what, the world can be an ugly place too. But if you have that within you and you give that to other people, you can change the world. So let's change the world for our children so we can leave them a legacy of hope and love and unity within the American people.
I don't think you can say that any better, Megan. Well said. We want to encourage you, we want to challenge you with those thoughts to leave a better world for our children, for your children, from your great-grandchildren. It's still well within our capacity to make a difference. And when you start feeling that hate online, you start feeling that hate on social media, remember, we've been in isolation pretty much from COVID for over 6 months. Our brains are going to be a little bit tweaky. We're going to be a little bit weirded out, and we're going to have a little bit higher anxiety and fear about the others than we normally would. Mm-hmm. So take a deep breath and realize that we are in this together and that we can still make a difference in the world that we live in. Thank you, everybody out there in Lionheart Institute podcast land. I hope this has been an episode that's touched your heart. I hope that you've gotten a ton out of it. I should have been saying all throughout it, please like, share, and comment, but please become a subscriber to our channel. We're trying to get more messages out just like this, about injustice, about courage to go to the next level, about coaching steps to become your best self, and really where to go to get wisdom that's going to propel you into achieving your full dreams and living a fulfilled life. And so we're going to have all those kind of different elements in our podcast, and we hope that you'll continue to participate. God bless you, and thank you for hanging out with us today. Say goodbye.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.